Hello, my name is Diana Isaacs. I am an endocrine clinical pharmacist and a certified diabetes care and education specialist. And I put together this presentation that I call the latest and greatest insulin pumps. I've really geared this towards anyone that I see in clinic that might be interested in an insulin pump for the first time or perhaps looking to change out their technology. Although this definitely could be used by anyone that is interested in learning more about the various diabetes technologies. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I did want to share my disclosures, even though this is not continuing education, just to let you know that I do a wide variety of work with basically almost all of the insulin pump and CGM companies. I don't have a favorite. I am employed by Cleveland Clinic as my primary employer, and I am trying to present the most up to date and unbiased information possible. In terms of what I hope to cover in this presentation, I'm going to go through all of the different types of insulin pumps, explain specifically how automated insulin delivery works when a pump is paired with a continuous glucose monitor, and then discuss some of the key differences between the systems so ultimately you can make an informed decision about what might be the best option for you. So, just to kind of level set, why an insulin pump? How is it delivering insulin? So, the idea is it is trying to mimic insulin release in a person that doesn't have diabetes. So, there's always a little bit being given in the background that serves as that basal insulin. And then every time you eat, or if you're trying to correct a high blood sugar, that would be bolus insulin. It uses only one type of insulin, which is typically a rapid acting insulin, which is different from someone that is taking injections, which will typically have a long acting insulin and a rapid acting insulin. But pumps only use rapid acting insulin. And why do we do this? Well, it turns out there's a lot of factors that impact glucose levels, and at least 42 are described here. This comes from diatribe.org, a great website to learn more about all things diabetes. But if you look on here, wow, there's a lot of factors. When it comes to food, it is much more than just, oh, carbohydrates will raise your sugar. Actually, fat and protein can have an impact. Even things like caffeine can raise glucose for some people. In terms of activity, there's also a wide range where some activities may actually spike a person if it's more high intensity. There can be environmental factors and so on. And so, all this to say is that it's really difficult to manage blood sugars when you're just doing like a set number of injections per day, or you're doing the same amount each time, just because there are so many factors that will impact those glucose levels. And this is one of the reasons why automation now, which can actually increase or decrease based on your blood sugar levels, can achieve more time in range, more likely to get to your glucose goals through doing that. So that brings me now to our different insulin pump options. And this is a space that continues to grow. These are the current FDA approved pumps. And so I've got listed the Omnipod 5 as well as the Omnipod Dash. The Omnipod 5 is the version that has automated insulin delivery. So that's the one I'm going to focus on. The Omnipod Dash works as a regular pump, and sometimes people will use the Dash if they're setting up their own, what they call like a DIY looping system, or an open source system. They may use the Dash, but most people now are going straight to the Omnipod 5. When it comes to Tandem, we have the T-Slim X2 as well as the Mobi. Both are also automated insulin delivery systems. With Medtronic, we have the MiniMed 780G, and then we have the Beta Bionics iLet. And then the newest pump is actually called the Sequel MedTech Twiist with Tidepool Loop. As of this presentation today, the Tidepool Loop with the Twiist is not yet available, but we do anticipate it will be available very soon. And hopefully I will update this when that becomes available. So again, just kind of level setting the features of all of these pumps. So they're all designed to work with what we call U100 insulin, Most insulins are U100. However, there are some like that are more concentrated, like U500 insulin or Humalog U200 insulin. And sometimes those insulins are used off label in the pump to allow it to hold more insulin. But do understand that it is off label. And so it requires us to manually calculate pump settings. So that can be done, but it just requires us to do extra calculations. They're all designed to really work with U100. They all have a bolus calculator with the exception of the iLet, which I'll talk a little more about in a little bit. So the bolus calculator allows you to put in the number of carbohydrates that you're eating. It will take in your sensor glucose level from your continuous glucose monitor or CGM. And it will also even take into account insulin on board. So, insulin from previous boluses that may still be working in your body to recommend a safe amount to take versus you having to calculate yourself all of these different settings. They're all designed to work with very small dose increments, as small as like 0.05 units. And so you can get much more precise dosing as compared to an injection, which is usually 1 unit, or a couple of pens will go down to half units. They have different types of alarms and reminders, such as to change out your cartridge or letting you know when high or low glucose levels. And then they also all have the ability to keep track of that active insulin so that if there is insulin working in your system, it will take that into account so that you don't end up giving yourself too much insulin. Now, most of our pumps have tubing. The exception is the Omnipod Dash and the Omnipod 5. So, this is what tubing looks like. There's an infusion set that is inserted on your body. Most of them are Teflon. You can get a steel infusion set, which is sometimes better if people have issues with the Teflon maybe getting clogged or just not staying in that well. And they have the ability to disconnect from that site. So if you're showering, bathing, going swimming, you can disconnect. With the Omnipod, because it's tubeless, that stays on. But the good news is that is waterproof. So, one thing I like to know, what happens when you have a bent cannula? Well, if you could imagine, if it's bent, the insulin is not able to get into your body. And so, what can happen is hyperglycemia. You can actually have blood sugars that are too high because instead of the insulin going into your body, it's probably leaking out of your sight, it's leaking on your skin. So, this is one of the really important educational points with a pump because you're only getting rapid acting insulin. You don't have a long acting insulin in the background. And so, it's really important to pay attention if you see that your blood sugars are starting to rise and you're not sure why, to check your site. And if it's not coming down with additional insulin, the recommendation would be to go ahead and change it out because it's possible that it got bent. Maybe it hit some scar tissue and so we'd want to change it so that it doesn't continue to go too high. In terms of where to wear the pump, well, any place where you could inject insulin, you could actually wear the pump. Now, if you have tubing, it may be more convenient to wear it on your stomach, for example, and then keep the pump in your pocket or wear it on your belt clip. But you can actually get quite creative, and there's different pouches that you can buy where you could wear it on your arm or your leg if you want to use a different site. With the tubeless, it's a little easier to choose different sites because you don't have to worry about the tubing getting stuck and trying to move it on over. So it's a little easier to pick sites like the lower back, upper buttocks area, the arms, etc. All right, so that brings me now to automated insulin delivery, which is an insulin pump that is paired with the CGM. And my question for you is this an artificial pancreas? And my answer to you is no. If you hear someone saying that they're selling you an artificial pancreas or there's an artificial pancreas available, there is not. And the reason I say that is because when I think of an artificial pancreas, I think, great, you're going to go ahead, put this device on, and it's going to do all of your diabetes for you. And you don't have to think about it anymore. And unfortunately, that is not true of any of our devices, at least not currently. They all still require you to do things like announce meals or to count your carbohydrates and put them in. But the technology has gotten better and better. So, what we do mean by automated insulin delivery or AID is that you have a pump and you also have a continuous glucose monitor. And so the CGM basically communicates that glucose level to the pump, which has an algorithm on it for adjusting insulin based on that glucose value. But not only that, CGMs have trend arrows, so they can let you know what direction the glucose is going. And so these algorithms take that into account and they actually can increase or decrease insulin based on the predicted glucose value to ultimately keep you in that target range. And so this is an example of one of the systems and what it's doing. So up above, you've got the glucose levels, and the green represents that target range of 70 to 180. And so the goal is we're trying to optimize the time spent there. The goal for most people is to spend 70% or more in that range. If you look at the bottom, this is the insulin delivery, and it's really dynamic. So you see that those rectangles, sometimes they're going really high, like as high as almost 3 units an hour. Sometimes they're much lower. The diamonds actually represent times where it's completely suspended, completely stopped. So it's very dynamic with the goal of keeping that glucose in that range. But one thing you will notice, if you go back to the glucose here, there are these rectangles which actually indicate when a person bolused. So either they entered carbohydrates or they gave themselves a correction, but they bolus. And that's the thing with all of these systems, we call them hybrid closed loops because really you still need to bolus. And why? Why is that? Why don't we have a system where you don't need to do that? Well, unfortunately, the way insulin works is it takes time to start working. Usually, we recommend pre-bolusing 5 to 15 minutes before you start eating to give it time to start eating. So if you just wait until it already rises, it's going to be playing catch up. And it's more likely you're going to be running higher and it's going to take time to come down. As opposed to if you announce when you're eating or you pre-bolus, then you're more likely to spend more time in range. Hopefully one day in the near future, we will get beyond that either through faster insulins or better algorithms. And I know all the pump companies are working on that. Okay, well, to use one of these systems, you need to have a compatible CGM. So I've listed here the different CGMs, and I will, when I go through each pump, I'll to explain which ones are currently compatible. But with the Libre systems, we have the Libre 2 and the Libre 3. The ones that are actually compatible are the Libre 2 Plus and the 3 Plus. Those are the ones that work with automated insulin delivery. And when they work with the pumps, they're actually real-time CGM. So if you're familiar at all with the Libre 2, it requires scanning to see your blood sugar reading. But the Libre 2 Plus, when used with the pump, allows you to see it on the pump in real time. Same thing with the Libre 3 Plus. And both of those are 15-day sensor wears with a 1 hour warm-up time. Now, ever since 365, I put it on here because it is what we call an integrated CGM, meaning it has the ability now to integrate with insulin pumps. At this time, there are not any direct partnerships, but we certainly hope to see that in the future. And it is called 365 because it is actually implanted under the skin and it lasts for 365 days. There is an outer transmitter that you can see in this picture, and that is placed over the sensor on the arm. And that is something that could be taken on and off very easily. So it's nice you can easily disconnect, but it typically does need to be charged every day. And then Medtronic's sensor, oops, went a little far too back. Okay, so Medtronic's sensor is the Guardian 4, is the current one in use. And this sensor is a 7-day wear. There is a transmitter that does need to be charged weekly. And then next to this is the insertion device to insert it. Good news is that the 4 compared to the 3, they got rid of those required calibrations. Now there's very limited calibrations that are needed, like one to go into the automated mode, but regular calibrations are not needed. And then we are very excited that the Medtronic Simplera will be coming. So the standalone version was recently FDA approved, and the version that goes with the pump is approved in other countries. We're just waiting on it in the US. But this is nice because it's more like with what we see with a Libre, where you insert it, the transmitter is completely disposable, and you tear it off each week and then you put a new one on. You don't need to worry about charging that transmitter anymore. And then when it comes to Dexcom, we have the G6 and the G7. And the G6 does have a reusable transmitter. So that is lasts for 3 months of time, and it is saved. So every 10 days, when you change out the sensor, you go ahead, you save that transmitter, and you wear that for 3 months while changing out the sensor every 10 days. And then the G7 was a bit of an upgrade from the G6 in that the transmitter is now fully disposable. So again, more like a Libre, where it's totally disposable. And then there's a few other upgrades too. So the warm up time is shorter. So the G6 is a 2 hour warm up versus the G7 is now less than 30 minutes. And then the wear time is still 10 days, but there's a 12-hour grace period. And then there's some additional alerts that are nice. And the app, also the G7 app, has some additional functionality where it includes some of the clarity data, some of the time in range data. Just going back to the Guardian, that is up to a 2 hour warm up. And then the Eversense is actually a 24-hour warm up. The reason I want to emphasize these warm ups is because when you change out your sensor, while it's warming up, you will not have automated insulin delivery. It will be some type of limited capacity, because if it doesn't have sensor glucose readings, then how is it supposed to automate the insulin, right? So that's where it's important. And that's why going from G6 to G7, where you had 2 hours, but now it's less than 30 minutes, can be really beneficial. All right, so let's get into each type of pump. So Omnipod 5 is our completely tubeless pump, and it works with the Omnipod 5 app, which now is available on Android and iPhone. We were waiting a while for iPhone, but it is available on both now. And both of them, well, the Android has Dexcom G6 and G7. The iPhone has Dexcom G6. And then with the controller, you can get G6, G7, or Libre 2 Plus. So there's a lot of nuance with this in terms of which sensor in which type of phone versus using the controller. The controller is actually a locked Android phone. And if you have it on the smartphone, then you don't have to carry a separate controller, which a lot of people like that, just having one device instead of two devices. But nothing is controlled on the pump itself. It is just a pod. And so there's no buttons on it or anything. It holds up to 200 units of insulin. And it's good for 70, well, actually it's good for 80 hours. So 3 days plus an 8 hour buffer period. And when you're done with it, you discard it. There's no charging it or saving it. It's just completely discarded. In terms of the automation, so all of the algorithms work a little bit differently. This one it uses the total daily insulin dose, and it's using it from the last 4 to 5 pods. When you use it for the first time, it is using the programmed settings to estimate the total daily insulin dose. But after that, it's not using the programmed basal rates. It's really running off of its algorithm based on that total daily insulin dose. You can set different glucose targets, so anywhere from 110 to 150 in 10-point increments. The lower target of 110 is associated with more time in range, although for people that may be more prone to low blood sugars, they may want to have higher targets. There is also an activity feature which can reduce the risk of lows. So this has a higher target of 150, but also in addition to that, it is much less aggressive with the insulin dosing. So this can be great for exercise. or just anything else that could cause lows, like sometimes alcohol use can lead to overnight lows. So this can be a great option. It can be set for up to 24 hours. There is Bluetooth connectivity with Gluco. That's the data platform, and that allows for automatic data uploads. There is no sharing app at this time. However, if a person's using Dexcom, then they can use the Dexcom Follow app to see the glucose readings. And then if using the controller, it would need to be charged. Typically daily is what is recommended. So this may be kind of data heavy for people watching, but I just wanted to share some of the outcomes of these different systems, because a lot of times you hear people make decisions based on, oh, well, I like the size of it or I like the color of it. But I also wanted you to understand the outcomes associated with the different devices, understanding that they weren't compared directly to each other. But still, I think it gives a good understanding of what to expect if you're using it. So this was published data with Omnipod 5 in almost 70,000 people with type 1 diabetes. And what they showed was that across all age groups, people did very well. So it's approved for ages 2 and over. And the time in range was actually 68.8% with that lowest target. So very close to the 70%. And then with the higher targets, it was a little bit low. But look at that time below 70, very minimal, less than around what was around 1%. So people do very well overall with the system. And another thing I wanted to mention is that recently this gained FDA approval in type 2 diabetes. So that's exciting as well. It's the first pump to officially gain that approval, even though we've been using them off label in type 2 diabetes for a while. One tip I want to give with this system is that because it works off of the total daily insulin dose, it tends to work better for people that are bolusing for their meals and giving corrections as needed for high blood sugars. It works much better for the type of person that doesn't bolus at all. It tends to they may tend to run a little bit higher for longer. So we definitely encourage the regular bolusing. All right, next I want to talk about the 780G. This is a tubed pump, and this one holds 300 units of insulin. So currently compatible with a Guardian sensor 3 or 4. Anyone getting the pump now would get the 4, but there are some people still using it with the older sensor, the 3, which does require 2 finger stick calibrations per day. And then this one actually has the lowest target of 100. You're going to see a lot of the other pumps are around 110. So you have that option to set 100, 110, or 120. And then in manual mode, so let's say you're not using the pump in automation, there is an option to actually use a feature called suspend before or on low, where it would still suspend if predicting to go low. The other pumps can't typically do this. If it's in manual mode, there are not any type of automated features. There is Bluetooth connectivity with this one as well, which allows for remote software upgrades. And actually, all of our pumps now have Bluetooth connectivity, which is great because that facilitates data sharing, as well as if there are upgrades to software, you can get it without needing to get a completely new pump. There are MiniMed and CareLink apps that allow for data sharing and viewing. And this is the only tubed pump that actually has a 7-day infusion set option. The others are typically meant for 3 days. And this pump runs off of AA battery. So definitely an important counseling point that we want people to carry extra batteries. With all of the pumps, we want people to have extra insulin, extra supplies, just in case something happens when you're out and it's not working and you need to give some insulin. The real world outcomes of this pump are looking very, very good. Something to keep note is that it is recommended to get the highest time in range to set that lowest target of 100. And then insulin action time is one of the features that can be adjusted with this pump. And it is recommended to set that for 2 hours to get the highest time in range. This is showing data from 100,000 real world users outside the US, because that's where originally this was approved, showing that the average time in range was 72.3%. but when put on these optimal settings, it was 78.8%. And the meal detection technology works very well with this system, where if someone forgets to bolus or doesn't bolus enough, it really comes in there and gives these automatic corrections that are pretty aggressive to get into range quickly. So that tends to work very, very well. And then also with this algorithm, it's really not working off of most of the pre-programmed settings. The big one that we adjust is the carbohydrate ratio, and we set that insulin action time in the target. But basal rates, correction factors, all of those really are not used in the automated mode. Next system is the Beta Bionics iLet. And this is truly a unique system in the fact that this is the only system that doesn't run off of any programmed settings. So this system actually, you program the person's weight, you connect them to CGM, which this system can connect with Dexcom G6, G7, or the Libre 3 Plus. This pump is a little smaller. It can hold up to 180 units of insulin, or it can work with pre-filled insulin cartridges. Those hold 160, but they're really nice because you don't have to fill it up yourself, which filling it typically means taking it from a vial, drawing it up, and putting it in. So this can come pre-filled, which is a nice option. And then in terms of settings, so there is a usual, less or more, which equates to a glucose target of 110, 120, or 130. And you can set a different one for a different time of day if you want to have a lower or higher target for a certain time of the day. And then with meals, there is no exact carb counting. It is simply announcing meals, which is done through usual meal, which most of the time usual would be expected to be used, but you also have that option then if you're eating less to put less and eating more to put more. It does calculate backup settings, so it will let you know what the total daily insulin dose is, as well as how much is being given at meals, at breakfast, lunch, dinner that are announced, and that's in the history. So someone can get access to that, but otherwise there's not programmed settings and those types of things. And there is a charger that is required for being able to use that. And then there is real world data now, but it's just not published yet, although it has been presented at some meetings. But on here, I have the pivotal trial. So this is the randomized controlled trial. We were actually one of the sites at Cleveland Clinic. And this is just showing that when compared to standard therapy, these saw that there was a decrease in A1C by 0.5%, and the time in range on average increased from 51% to 65% in the group that used the iLet. All right. And then next I've got the Tandem, which there's the t:slim X2 and there's the Mobi, and both of them run off of the Control IQ algorithm. So the t:slim X2 is a touch screen. It holds 300 units of insulin, and it is compatible with the Dexcom G6, G7, and the Libre 2 Plus. There is also a mobile app which allows you to be able to bolus from your phone without having to take your pump out. And this algorithm actually does work off of a lot of the pre-programmed settings. So it does take into account the basal rates that we program, where all the other pumps don't take that into consideration. So it is, on one hand, that's kind of nice because it allows us to have a little more control over the algorithm. So as long as those settings are set optimally, that could really help you. Unfortunately, if they're set totally incorrectly, that could then hurt the algorithm. And then there's also correction doses. So up to one every hour, if the glucose is predicted to go over 180, it will give that correction every hour. The T-Connect app is what's used for bolusing, as well as that facilitates these remote downloads so you can share the data with your clinic. And then this does require a charging cable to keep it going. And this is kind of the inner workings of the Control IQ algorithm. So instead of aiming for a target like you see with the other systems, this system is actually aiming for a range, which is 112.5 to 160. And then it shows you how it would decrease if it's predicted to go below 112.5. It'll increase if it's predicted to go above 160. and then it will suspend if predicted to go below 70, and then it will increase, or it'll actually give an automatic correction if it's predicted to go over 180. In addition to the usual control IQ, there is also a sleep activity and an exercise activity. So the sleep activity has this tighter target of 112.5 to 120. Some people will keep it in sleep all the time because they like to have that tighter target, but it does not do automatic corrections. So as long as if a person's really paying attention and corrects on their own, the sleep activity could work great. For those that really rely on these hourly corrections, probably using the usual mode will work better for them. And then there is also an exercise activity, which has a slightly higher target range of 140 to 160. This can help for exercise. Some people find that they do need a little more than this, that they also need to use a different basal profile, just because even with this, even though it has aiming for that higher range, they still may drop too low with this. And it does still give auto corrections every hour. So that can be one of the contributing factors that could lead to lows during exercise. So Mobi, again, it's working off of the same algorithm, but this is smaller. It's kind of similar to the Omnipod size, actually. And this, everything is controlled through the mobile app. There is a button on the side where you could do boluses, just set boluses, but there's no touch screen or anything. Everything is typically done through the phone. So this holds 200 units of insulin. It integrates with the Dexcom G6 and G7. At this time, it's only on iPhone, so that's an important consideration. There is a shorter tubing option of just 5 inches, so you could actually have it taped on the skin and then have the infusion set next to it and not have to ever pull it out. And it is water resistant, so you could keep it on for a shower. Some people prefer to take it off, but it is an option to keep that on. And there is charging is required, but it is a wireless charger. And actually, I'm not going into all the details of how to fill these, but do know that the way you fill this is a little bit different than with the T-Slim X2. They actually made it a little bit easier. It's a syringe-driven pump fill, so it's more similar to how we fill Medtronic pumps. So that has gotten a little bit easier versus the T-Slim X2 has this cartridge that you need to fill and first pull the air out of it. So there's a lot of real world data with the Control IQ algorithm. This is data taken from people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. At this time, it's only FDA approved for type 1, although I know they're going for the indication for type 2. And this is showing how time in range overall increased from 63.6% to 73.6%. That was similar in type 1. In type 2, it actually increased from 69% to 78%. And then the last one I want to talk about is the Sequel MedTech Twiist. This pump is not yet available, but we expect it to be available any day. And this runs the Tidepool loop algorithm. So I think this is really exciting because the loop algorithm actually came from the DIY looping community, which is a community that was actually very frustrated with the slow progress of the FDA in approving these devices. I know it seems like we have a lot to use now, but a few years ago, we all we had was one device and then we only had two. And so it was slow progress. And they said, listen, we know this technology is out. We're not waiting. So they created their own mobile apps and got it linked up with CGM and insulin pumps. And turns out they created a really good algorithm that does some pretty unique things. And they collected data on the people using it and submitted it to the FDA. And guess what? It got approved. And not only did it get approved, but now they have a partner, an insulin pump partner, which is the Sequel MedTech Twiist. So this algorithm is very unique in that it actually has a target that can go as low as 87, which is lower than our next lowest is the Medtronic of 100. So it's exciting to see that we have these lower targets. And for those that really want to really have more time in range, or let's say during pregnancy when we have much tighter targets, I'm excited to see the potential for this. There are unique things in terms of the way the bolus is delivered. So if you're going to be eating foods that get absorbed really quickly, like let's say a lollipop or juice, you can use the lollipop bolus. If you're having your typical mixed meal, that would be a taco bolus. And then pizza is notorious for spiking blood sugars hours later. And so you could use the pizza bolus. The insulin action time is fixed, which is similar to the Tandem pump, actually, where it's a set amount. It's not one of the settings that we can actually adjust. And one of the unique things is it does the 6-hour glucose forecast, which it recalculates every 5 minutes. So it's increasing or decreasing insulin based on that forecast. And one of the unique things about this pump in particular is that it has a very good occlusion detection. So if there is an occlusion in the device, it is supposed to actually check that much faster than our other types of insulin pumps. And it does hold 300 units. Initially, it's only going to work with iPhone, but it will have Apple Watch compatibility where you actually could bolus from your watch. So obviously, I don't have real world data for you, but this was the data, this prospective study from the Tidepool loop that was submitted to the FDA. And so this showed that the mean time in range actually increased from 67% to 73% in the people using this Tidepool loop algorithm. And that mean A1Cs dropped by about 0.33%, as well as low blood sugars were reduced. So we look forward to seeing how this algorithm will work with the Twiist insulin pump. So I have a couple of charts that go through the differences. I realize this is a lot of information. Because this is a recording, hopefully you can pause it, you can take a deeper look at these tables, and I've got some wonderful resources to share with you as well. But this is just showcasing on here the amount of insulin that each of these pumps holds, the CGM compatibility, the minimum age that it is FDA approved for use, as well as the minimum daily insulin that is needed for the algorithm to work effectively. So you can see it ranges from really anywhere from 5 to 10 units. The Control-IQ also has that minimum weight of 55 pounds. And then I also highlighted here the lowest algorithm target, so you're aware of that. And then continuing on, I have some information about how is the algorithm working, how is the basal automating. So for example, with Omnipod 5, it's really working off of that total daily insulin, and it's updated each pod change with a 60-minute prediction. With Control-IQ, it's increasing or decreasing from the programmed basal rates with a 30-minute prediction. And it's thought that that correction factor really is one of the ways to fine tune the algorithm as well. There was a recent publication showing that's part of the secret sauce of optimizing that algorithm. 780G is really looking at the total daily insulin from the past 2 to 6 days. And there's a lot more going into it because there's the automatic corrections as well. And then iLet is initiated based on the user weight and then adapts with the glucose profile. For bolus adjustments, depending on the pump, there are different things you can fine tune. With Omnipod 5, you can adjust almost anything to impact those boluses. With Control-IQ, it's just going to be that carb ratio and the sensitivity factor, how much 1 unit of insulin is expected to lower glucose. With 780G, it's just the carb ratio and that insulin action time. And then iLet, there's not adjustments to make. And then with basal adjustments, Omnipod 5, it's just the glucose target. Same thing with 780G and the iLet. The Control-IQ, that's where you can touch that sensitivity factor, the glucose target range, as well as those basal rates. And then for automatic corrections, the Control-IQ has one every hour, and then 780G will have one up to every 5 minutes if glucose is over 120 and it's reached that maximum auto basal. One other thing I just want to say is in terms of how you get these pumps varies a little bit too. So Omnipod 5 is only going the pharmacy route. The other pumps typically go through durable medical equipment suppliers. And why that can be important is that with pharmacy, there is no contract. So if you wear it and you decide, okay, I want to try something else after a month or two, no problem. When you are in a contract with the durable medical equipment or the DME, those are usually 4-year contracts, or with Medicare, even 5 years. And so it's just, you're locked in. So you wouldn't be able to easily switch to another DME pump. You could always switch to a pharmacy benefit pump. Now, the sequel Twiist is planning to go through the pharmacy, and I know these other pumps too are interested in going through the pharmacy route. So these are things that may change in the future. And all of them will typically have some type of trial period where if you try it for 2 weeks, for example, and decide you hate it, usually you can return it, but definitely check with the pump companies to know for sure. Okay. So I want to kind of close off before I go into resources with what do our guidelines say about using pumps? Like, should you be using one? Do you need to be using one? So every year, the American Diabetes Association updates their standards of care. And what they say, they have pretty strong opinion now, not opinion, evidence really, that AID systems should be the preferred insulin delivery method to improve glycemic outcomes and reduce hypoglycemia and disparities in youth and adults with type 1 diabetes. And why is this? Why is this such a strong recommendation? It's a level A, which is the highest level of recommendation. It's because that evidence I show you, it's really hard to get 70% or even close to that time in range when you're doing injections, when you have type 1 diabetes. It just is. Now, does that mean everyone needs to use an AID system? Absolutely not. And I have tons of patients I work with that do injections and do a great job. And they have better technologies too with connected pens. So we're not saying everyone needs to use an AID system, but it definitely, there are great outcomes and we should at least be offering it to everyone. So if you haven't, if you're listening to this and no one's even offered it to you and you have type 1 diabetes, please ask about it because these systems have great evidence behind them. Now, when it comes to type 2 diabetes or other forms of diabetes, they say also actually that insulin pumps, preferably used with CGM, should be offered for diabetes management to youth and adults that are on multiple daily injections. So there's a lot of people with type 2 diabetes that don't even need insulin, or maybe just need a once a day insulin and are on other medications. But there are also several that have had long-standing diabetes and do need multiple injections. And so they also should be offered this technology too. So if you haven't, if that's you and you haven't been offered, please ask. And then they repeat this statement over and over again. They say the choice of device should be made based on the individual's circumstance, preferences, and needs. And I cannot emphasize that enough. You've heard about a lot of different systems. They all have differences, and it's not that one does not work for everyone. And even though I showed you different evidence that might say, oh, well, this system got 75% in range and this one was 68, do understand that they weren't compared directly to each other. And for a given person, one system might get them 80% in range, and another system, maybe that would get them 65%. But also, there's a lot more than time in range, right? It's quality of life, and there's the whole experience with it. So, there's a lot of things to take into account when selecting that device. With all of them, we want you to be able to share data with your healthcare team. And fortunately, with the Bluetooth connectivity, it is so much easier than the olden days where we had to plug it in and wait for it to download. Now it's so easy, and that really facilitates virtual care. So you don't need to come into the clinic all the time to share your data. You can do it through a virtual visit, which is so convenient. And because I know this is a ton of information, I want to make sure you do your research and continue learning. This is a great website called diabeteswise.org where you can actually do device comparisons. You can ask what you can read about people's experiences with the different devices. You can learn so many things. So I encourage you to check this site out. And then this one's geared a little more for healthcare professionals, but I still think everyone should know about it. It's called the Panther Tools, and it does a deep dive into each device. There's also really beautiful comparison charts where you can learn things like how it's calculating the insulin dose when it's not an automation, because all of these systems, if you don't have a CGM reading, and sometimes other factors could cause you to actually go out of automation, and that's important to understand and what to do about that. And then there are a bunch of simulation apps. So if you want to gain the experience of, well, what's it like using the system? What does it look like? What would it be like to bolus and use that bolus calculator? You can try these different systems out. Most of them have mobile apps associated with them that you can try out and download. And then here are a list of resources. So I've listed the websites out. Because this is a recording, you probably won't be able to click on them, but hopefully you can copy them over. Maybe I can find a way in the comments to make them clickable. But these are a list of those sites. And of course, going to the company's website will provide you all of the up-to-date information. And then here is my contact information. You can find me on social media on Instagram or Twitter at Diana M. Isaacs. And then I do have a podcast that I do with Natalie Bellini, an amazing nurse practitioner out of University Hospitals. So you can watch the video versions at hcplive.com, or it's also available wherever you tune in to your podcasts. And with that, I thank you so much for listening. And please reach out if you have any questions.